Prince William really seems to be stepping into that future king role in a much more aggressive way lately, and this story that's been circulating around Windsor is exactly why people are suddenly looking at the palace differently. Because, according to multiple royal insiders, what happened at Windsor Castle on May 14th was not some awkward little guest list mix-up. The way this has been described, it sounds more like William quietly decided he was done tolerating what he believed was becoming a private influence club around Queen Camilla and Tom Parker Bowles. And honestly, the details people are sharing about this are incredibly specific. Apparently, around 2:55 in the afternoon, guests were arriving for what everyone assumed would just be another formal royal gathering connected to Queen Elizabeth's legacy. Nothing unusual on the surface. Wealthy donors, business people, royal associates, the usual crowd that circles around these events. But insiders are saying the atmosphere completely changed once security started stopping certain people from entering St. George's Hall. The name that keeps coming up over and over is Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Thompson. Royal watchers already know who he is because he's been one of King Charles's most visible and trusted aides for years. People online are obsessed with him every time he appears at events in full uniform. But inside palace circles, he apparently has a much bigger role than people realize. He's deeply tied into the king's scheduling, communications, private operations, all of that. So when Johnny Thompson suddenly became the face of the security crackdown, people immediately understood this was serious. According to the story being told inside royal circles, one major businessman showed up expecting VIP treatment because he had connections through Tom Parker Bowles' network. Instead, his credentials were rejected right at the checkpoint. No quiet apology. No, let us sort this out. Apparently, Thompson flat out told him his authorization had been revoked under something called Mandate 4. And this is where the entire thing starts sounding less like social drama and more like palace warfare, because the guest allegedly tried to argue that he had personal access through Queen Camilla's side of the household, but Thompson reportedly shut that down immediately and had security escort him away from the entrance before things escalated further. Now look, obviously we can't independently verify every single dramatic detail floating around these royal stories, but what's interesting is how consistent the narrative has become over the last week. Multiple people close to the palace are all describing the same overall situation. William and Princess Anne supposedly became extremely concerned that certain people around Camilla's circle were using royal proximity to build influence, business opportunities, and private connections while King Charles has been focused on his health. And if that's true, I can absolutely see why William would be furious about it. One thing about William is that he has always seemed obsessed with protecting the institution itself, sometimes even more than protecting individual family relationships. That's very different from Charles, who has often appeared more emotional and more willing to tolerate complicated personal dynamics. William feels colder sometimes, but also more strategic. The really interesting part is how Princess Anne reportedly fits into all this, because insiders are saying Anne has fully aligned herself with William behind the scenes. And honestly, that makes perfect sense to me. Anne has spent decades building this reputation as the hardest working royal in the family. She's extremely disciplined, very old school about duty, and not particularly interested in social climbers or celebrity-style networking around the monarchy. So apparently, William and Anne started quietly monitoring the growing influence surrounding Tom Parker Bowles and certain wealthy associates connected to Camilla's social circle. According to Palace Whispers, they believed the line between royal duty and private business relationships was getting dangerously blurry. That's where this so-called Mandate 4 supposedly comes in. People inside royal administration are describing it as some kind of emergency override authority tied to institutional protection of the crown. Basically, a mechanism that allows the heir and senior royals to intervene when they believe palace operations are moving in the wrong direction. And the way witnesses describe it, the tension exploded once members of Camilla's household realized guests were actively being blocked from entering. Apparently, one palace aide confronted security demanding answers about why the Queen's personal invitees were suddenly being treated like unauthorized visitors. But instead of backing down, Johnny Thompson reportedly doubled down and made it clear he was acting under direct authority from Princess Anne and Prince William. What really pushed this entire situation into another level, though, was the financial side of the story. Because after the Windsor incident, insiders started talking about something called Project Integrity, which allegedly became the backbone of William's decision to step in so aggressively. And this is where the narrative stops feeling like ordinary family tension and starts sounding like an internal investigation. According to reports circulating around Kensington Palace, Project Integrity is basically a forensic audit looking into how certain people connected to Queen Camilla's circle may have been using royal access to build private business influence. The accusations being whispered are honestly pretty serious. The claim is that wealthy international figures were getting unusually close access to royal events through connections tied to Tom Parker Bowles and his associates, then later using those relationships commercially. Now, again, none of this has been publicly confirmed by the palace, but what's interesting is how detailed these stories have become. Apparently, investigators identified at least 12 major international deals where royal proximity may have helped secure partnerships, consulting arrangements, or luxury brand connections. And if William genuinely believed that was happening during his father's illness, I can completely understand why he would see it as unacceptable. Because from William's perspective, this probably looks like people monetizing the monarchy itself. Not directly selling royal titles, obviously, but selling access, appearances, photos, networking opportunities, things that create the impression of royal endorsement without officially saying it. And that's always been one of the monarchy's biggest vulnerabilities. The crown survives on symbolism. Once people start treating royal access like a corporate asset, the whole institution starts looking compromised. Apparently, the operation worked in a very calculated way. First, wealthy people would get invited into exclusive events through Camilla's extended social network. Then they would end up photographed near senior royals or inside highly prestigious royal environments. Later, those same images and connections could quietly boost credibility in private business negotiations overseas. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of thing William seems built to hate. He has spent years talking about slimming down the monarchy and making it appear more disciplined, more modern, less chaotic. So if he started believing a shadow court was developing around Camilla's household while Charles was recovering, he probably saw it as an institutional threat rather than simple gossip. And apparently Princess Anne completely agreed with him. The family tension around this is getting fascinating because not everybody inside the royal family reportedly supports the way William handled it. One of the biggest surprises in these reports is Prince Edward. According to insiders, Edward was deeply uncomfortable with the public humiliation aspect of what happened at Windsor. He allegedly confronted William and Anne privately and questioned whether they were protecting the monarchy or damaging it from within. That honestly sounds very believable to me, because Edward has always been seen as one of the calmer, more diplomatic royals. He usually avoids these kinds of aggressive power struggles, but Anne reportedly had absolutely no patience for that argument. Sources say she basically responded by insisting that royal tradition cannot become something wealthy people buy access to. And that sentence alone really tells you where Anne's mindset is right now. She and William apparently believe they're defending the monarchy's long-term survival, even if it creates short-term family hostility. Another thing people inside royal circles cannot stop talking about is Johnny Thompson's role in all this, because using him specifically sent a huge signal internally. William could have handled this quietly through legal teams or palace administrators. Instead, he used one of King Charles's most trusted operational figures as the visible enforcer of the new rules. That matters psychologically. Inside the palace, Thompson represents the king's inner machinery. So when he publicly carried out William's orders, many people interpreted it as proof that the center of power inside the monarchy is already shifting toward the next reign. And honestly, that may be the biggest takeaway from this entire situation. Charles is still king, obviously, but these reports make it sound like William has already started building the structure of his future monarchy behind the scenes. More controlled, more rigid, less socially flexible, much less tolerant of unofficial influence networks. Then things escalated even further after May 16th, when Charles reportedly signed something called the Joint Advisory Council Charter. And this part is probably the most devastating detail for Camilla personally. According to palace insiders, the document fundamentally changed how invitations, guest approvals, and partnerships connected to the Queen's office are handled. Instead of Camilla's household independently controlling those relationships, everything now supposedly routes through a shared oversight system where William holds veto authority. And if those reports are accurate, it basically means William now has direct influence over who gains access to royal events tied to Camilla's side of the palace. What makes this even more unbelievable is how quickly everything supposedly happened after that charter was signed. According to people familiar with the situation, within 24 hours, members of Queen Camilla's household suddenly lost independent access to guest systems and event databases. Then by May 18th, senior staff inside her office were reportedly informed that they would no longer operate solely under the Queen's authority. Instead, major decisions would now pass through Prince William's private office. And honestly, if even half of that is true, then William did not just send a message, he completely reorganized the internal structure around Camilla without making a public announcement about it. That's why so many royal watchers are calling this one of the biggest behind-the-scenes power shifts in years. The really uncomfortable part for people close to the Queen is the image this creates. Publicly, Camilla still appears exactly the same. She stands beside Charles at events, attends ceremonies, smiles for photographs. Everything looks normal on the surface. But according to these reports, privately, she has lost enormous operational freedom inside the palace. Some insiders are even describing her position now as symbolic rather than influential, which is a brutal thing to say about a queen consort. And apparently, the atmosphere inside her household has become extremely tense because people connected to Tom Parker Bowles' social network suddenly realized the system protecting them was disappearing in real time. What's interesting is how carefully William supposedly planned all of this. The timeline being described sounds less emotional and more strategic. Reports say the operation quietly started back on April 1st when Windsor Castle security systems were upgraded. At the time, nobody thought much about it because the palace framed it as routine modernization. But now insiders claim those digital monitoring systems were actually designed to track exactly who was entering royal residences and which offices authorized their access. That means William may have been preparing this crackdown for weeks before anybody realized what was happening. Then, apparently on April 15th, William and Princess Anne held a long private meeting at Sandringham where they reviewed personnel connected to Camilla's household. According to insiders, they identified specific aides and assistants they believed were facilitating questionable access arrangements involving wealthy associates and business figures. By the time the Windsor incident happened in May, the groundwork had already been laid. And honestly, that part makes the whole thing feel much more believable to me. Because real palace operations are never spontaneous. Everything is planned quietly months in advance. One detail that really caught people's attention this week was Tom Parker Bowles reportedly being seen leaving a major legal office in London looking visibly stressed. Witnesses described him appearing pale and frustrated while getting into a private vehicle after meetings with attorneys. Now, of course, nobody officially knows what those meetings involved, but palace speculation immediately exploded. Some people believe he was trying to understand whether the new restrictions could legally be challenged. Others think he may simply be protecting himself in case further investigations become public. Either way, it definitely added fuel to the rumors that this conflict is far from over. And the biggest question hanging over everything right now is what King Charles actually thinks about all this behind closed doors. Because that's the part nobody fully understands yet. On one hand, reports suggest Charles signed the new oversight structure himself, which would imply he approved William's actions, at least to some extent. But on the other hand, Charles has always been deeply protective of Camilla personally. So it's difficult to imagine him being completely comfortable watching her influence get reduced this dramatically. That tension could become a serious issue later. Some insiders think Camilla may eventually push back publicly through subtle media briefings or leaks meant to make William appear overly harsh and controlling. And honestly, royal history shows that palace households absolutely use the press against each other when internal relationships break down. But there's also another possibility here. Camilla's side could simply retreat quietly, and wait for Charles's health to improve, hoping he eventually restores more balance inside the palace. The problem is that once systems like this become embedded into security operations and administrative structures, they are extremely difficult to reverse. That's why many people close to the palace believe William is not thinking short-term anymore. He's already preparing the monarchy he wants to inherit, a smaller royal family, less dependence on social circles, much tighter control over influence and access, more institutional discipline. That seems to be the direction he's pushing toward very aggressively now. And then there's the final detail that has everybody nervous inside royal circles right now. According to one source connected to royal security, the list used during the Windsor removals apparently was not complete. The digital registry Johnny Thompson carried supposedly still contains additional names flagged for what insiders are calling institutional misalignment. And the rumor spreading through the palace tonight is that some of those names may actually belong to